Introduction. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's good that I get the applause beforehand, so that's then I won't go empty-handed at least. Thanks for the introduction, Tora. I hope I won't let you down. It was a great pleasure to be invited here to KVIT, and I was perhaps even more happy than some of the other lecturers, because I used to come here as a student 15 years ago. We came here from Skövde to attend the KVIT seminars. I went here for 2 years, so it was around the year 2000 or something like that. And when I started thinking of this, I actually remembered some of the talks. So I remembered Pim Hasselager, who talked about embodied cognition. I remember he got a question from one of the students that, so what happens to a person that has a disability, such as missing a leg? Will his or her cognition be different in some way? And he said yes, and then I don't remember anything more. But yeah, so that was kind of, it got stuck in my mind. I also remember Sidney Dekker. Now my mind is a bit blurry, but I think he talked about automation and autopilot and pilot error in these systems, because pilots don't understand the system or what state the system is in. And then I got to thinking that, I'm going to talk about embodied cognition, and I'm also going to talk about autonomous systems. So I'm going to talk about well, not the same thing, but perhaps they influenced me in some way to get where I am today. So perhaps some of you will actually also be influenced by me or some of the other speakers and actually come back here someday and talk to the new cognitive science students. With that introduction, let's get down to business. I will talk to you about simulation theories and robots, with perhaps an emphasis on simulation theories. But let's start with the robots. So in today's society, robots are getting more and more common, and especially in the area of self-driving cars. So a car is a kind of a robot, but it's a bit different as well. But they are getting increasingly autonomous. So for example, Volvo has this Drive Me project that states that they're going to have self-driving cars in Gothenburg by the year 2017, and that's the car there. So they highlight this or make PR by saying that you can use your iPad while driving. So, and this is probably good, especially for truck drivers, since they do it even today doing their iPad stuff, but the trucks aren't really automated. So it's probably a good thing that we have these projects. The robots are among us, or they become increasingly more common in spaces which we share with the robots. So, for example, on the roads, in the industry, and even in the homes. And this puts more and more demands on the robots and on us. So, to take a simple example, we have a zebra crossing here in London. I think it was Abbey Road. I took it from Wikimedia Commons. But let's imagine a future where the buses are fully automated, that they don't have a human driver at all. There's nobody sitting in the driver's seat. So what will happen then? Well, for example, we need to know or be confident that the bus will stop in some way. So the automated bus need to signal this in some way. You can't make, for example, when we do it normally, we sometimes make eye contact with the driver. We see how the bus drives, whether it slows down or not. So we have to come up with new ideas about how these automated systems can signal things to us. And also, from another perspective, the bus need to know stuff about us. So for example, will the bus infer that these people will actually pass, or will they wait around here until that guy has passed? And this guy over here, is he actually going to cross the zebra crossing here? Or is he waiting for somebody, or is he just viewing something? Because if the bus can't infer these things, then it will just stand there, of course, and wait for the people to cross. So there are an increasing demand for these autonomous systems to be increasingly like cognitive systems. So we have to, or at least it seems like we have to make them a bit like our cognitive systems in certain respects. So that's the main point I want to make here, that there is an increasing demand of making systems more cognitive. And there is use of that. And it's even the case that now the EU or European Commission thinks it's a good thing for robots to dream or to sleep. That's kind of strange in a bit, because the stereotype of a robot is something that never gets tired, doesn't have to eat or sleep or do anything. It can just monotonically go on forever, like the Terminator, and he doesn't have to sleep. So the European Commission decided to give 5.4 million euro to this consortium consisting of, for example, the robotics developer KUKA, who has this famous commercial where it plays table tennis with a famous table tennis player. It's really good. You could have a look at it. There's a new version up now as well. It's all on YouTube. This one is a bit of a fake, so the robot isn't that good as it looks. So I'm not part of this project, so I don't know exactly how they are going to do it. But what I thought that I was going to do in this this talk is to give you a background on why it makes sense to make a robot dream, and give you some of the possible background on what the benefits could be of making a robot dream instead of just acting all the time. So that's basically one of the things I did for my PhD, look at robot dreams. But let's start from the beginning, and let's hope I get to the end by in the right time. So I will eventually get to the robot dreams. But first a little bit about simulation theories and where I started. Okay, you guys are cognitive scientists, so you probably know all this, so I don't have to explain that much of it. But when I was a student, I usually studied traditional cognitive science with the focus on mental representations and the cognitivist idea of that you should only study mental representation. The body isn't that important, the context isn't that important, social aspects and culture isn't that important. And the main thing is that we should study mental representations. And then I was exposed to a lot of courses in embodied and situated cognition, which I thought was really great. And embodied cognition, as you know, emphasizes that cognition happens in interaction with the world, that the body and the context are key to understanding the way our cognitive systems work. Another trend, especially in robotics or in cognitive modeling, was that we should not worry too much about mental representation. We should only worry about these perception action loops. So there is a direct coupling or interaction with the world, which does not involve these slow mental processes of building up an internal world. So there was a lot of debate in the 90s about whether mental representations can, whether it's a good construct to have in a robot, and how we could get rid of it, basically, as you probably know. But I'm, as a person, I'm a bit afraid of conflict. I want to please everybody. So perhaps that's why I kind of liked Andy Clark's view on this, and that was that you shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. He said it in one of his famous books. So he didn't want to get rid of the notion of mental representation totally, but perhaps we could fit it into the embodied cognition framework in some way. And I thought that that was a great idea. So that's probably how I got started with the thing I'm going to talk to you about today, which is called embodied simulations. I will just call them simulations for short, but it's good to call them embodied simulation because there are lots of things called mental simulation, and I will only discuss a certain type of mental simulation in my talk. So when I say simulation, I mean this kind of embodied simulation, a particular type of simulation process. So the kind of simulation theory that I'm interested in, well, I'm not the only one, as you can see. So there are many different types of simulation theories that postulate basically, kind of similar mechanisms or similar aspects of cognition. So the most famous ones, I think, are Barcelow's perceptual symbol system hypothesis, which came out in 1999, and then he has developed this for a long time. And that's more directed towards conceptual system or conceptual knowledge of the world. Damasio, a famous neuroscientist, he has these concepts about our as-if loops, where you can decouple the body or the bodily ground for emotions. So instead of letting the emotion be generated by the bodily or the internal organs of the body, and that your heart rate increases and so on, you can simulate an emotion so that you can more quickly experience the emotion by decoupling the body from the brain in that sense. He also has another less well-known theory of convergence zones that was developed in 1989 already, which Barcelow has used in his. So that's about memory. And then we have Rick Rush's emulation theory. He chooses to use the term emulation instead of simulation, but I won't get into that debate, basically. My house god is Germund Heslov, so he's the guy whose ideas I've been developing most and being most influenced by, basically. So that's where I come from, basically. And his idea is called the simulation hypothesis. Later he's also called it simulation theories. And as you can see from this slide, simulation has been applied to almost every cognitive phenomena that we usually associate with. Like it's a textbook of cognitive psychology, basically. We have motor imagery, perception, memory, mental representation, social cognition, emotion, higher level thought processes in general, language, and all of these different cognitive phenomena have been, or parts of them are explained by these simulation processes in various ways. In my talk I will focus a bit on action planning and motor imagery mostly, so I won't go into details on the other ones much, but just focus on the simulation aspect or simulation processes. And if you want, you can divide these and categorize them in various different ways. One way is to see it more like that some of these simulation theories, they focus more on how we generate meaning, how we understand the world and create concepts, language, and so on. While others focus more on the adaptive aspect of simulation, on how it makes our cognition more effective and how we can act better in a fastly changing world and so on. But there are other dimensions on which you can view similarities and differences between these different simulation theories. But when I talk about simulation theories, I mean that they have basically two characteristics, which and all of the ones that I mentioned earlier or on the previous slide, they have these two, but to various extent. So the first thing is that simulations, they are reactivations. This means that when you experience a cognitive phenomena, then you have reactivated some of your sensory and motor areas of the brain. So the mechanisms for controlling our body that have evolved early on in human history are the ones that get reactivated in a way during various cognitive phenomena. So that's the first aspect. The other aspect is anticipation, that there are predictive mechanisms that allow simulated actions or actions to elicit the perceptual consequences of that action. And those perceptual consequences in turn can elicit another action or a simulated action. So these are the two basic ideas that come with simulation theories as I see them. So to explain this in more detail, I choose to demonstrate this by a very simple diagram of how it works. So I will tell you a bit about the non-simulating brain, how that works, how the online simulation brain works, and how the offline simulation brain works. But very simplified. But just so you get the general gist of what I mean.